Hey guys, how are you doing? Welcome to another tutorial on my channel, and in this tutorial we're going to create materials for our ship by hand instead of just downloading them from the internet as we did on the previous tutorial. On this tutorial we're going to create materials for our ship ourselves so that we can have a bit more control over how they look. Okay, it's probably going to be a two-part tutorial, and I am going to assume that you already know the basics of how the material system works and of the shading interface in Blender. Okay, if you don't know that, then take a look at my previous tutorial where I spent most of my time explaining exactly how that works, because I'm not going to go through that again today. So over here I have my shader editor set to world. I'm going to set it to object, and I can see the material. I am working on this big ass material over here. If I come to edit mode and I hit select, that's going to select all the faces that are associated with this material. So like these faces over here, I am going to click this button of add a new material. What this button actually does is it creates a duplicate of this material. So it saves the original one. I have this one over here and I can set it to fake user, and it creates a new one which I'm going to call main ship. I'm just going to rename it. Now I have the main ship material over here. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and select everything that's coming into the material output, and I'm going to delete it. This turned pure black. Of course, I'm going to add a principled BSDF. It sounds like BDSM, but it isn't. Okay, so now if I change something over here, now the ship looks like a Barbie ship. Now what we have is a perfectly homogeneous material, and that isn't very realistic. That isn't how ships or materials or things usually are. And all the process that we're going to go through now, I'm just going to set it to be pure white. This material usually isn't pure white. And all the process that we're going to go through right now is of adjusting the material so that it looks less perfect, okay? Because every single surface, if you just come over here and you look at the wall behind me, you'll notice that there are imperfections. I mean, that picture's crooked, but also you have some stains. There's a stain right over here. That's a stain. And this is the kind of stuff that really gives a material a lot of realism. So we're gonna do some basic techniques of how to add that in this tutorial, and we're gonna work on the material preview mode, and on the next tutorial we're gonna jump into cycles and we're going to do a more refined approach to working with this material. And we're also gonna work on the metal material, put a little bit of rust in there to just blend the two different materials together. So the first thing is just think about all the layers of dirt and oils that will build up naturally over the surface of something like this. Okay, this is a ship. Of course people would clean it, but some oil, some scratches would still be visible over here. So what I'm gonna do is just with Shift A, I'm gonna add a noise texture. Control T. Again, for this Control T thing to work, you need to have Edit Preferences, Add-ons, Node Wrangler enabled. If you don't have Node Wrangler enabled, this isn't gonna work. I'm just gonna basically plug the color into the base color, and it looks dumb. I'm gonna plug the factor, sorry. The factor is the black and white version, the color is the cotton candy version. So this is the black and white version, this is what I want. I'm gonna come over here and I'm gonna change the scale. It isn't an exact science to how you apply these imperfections, but one thing that you gotta keep in mind, a good rule of thumb for that is, the bigger these details are, the smaller the ship's going to look, because a small object tends to have proportionally larger details on it, or rather, a detail will appear larger on a small object. So if I have my ship and it's kind of like this, it's kind of gonna look like a miniature. But if I just crank it up like this, that might be more realistic. Can increase the detail a bit, because the detail again just makes the ship look a bit bigger. Be careful not to go too far in the other direction, just make the ship look huge. Over here I'm gonna add a color ramp. Okay, the color ramp is probably the most useful node. It works kind of like the levels effect in Photoshop, and I'm just going to lower this a bit just so I'm gonna come over here to the blacks actually, and I'm gonna choose a gray color, because what that's gonna do is it's gonna give me some subtle imperfections that aren't true. You're not supposed to notice them up front, but they're supposed to be there and to give you some detail. Okay, so I'm just gonna come over here. I'm actually going to add this same texture into my roughness, and let's take a look at that. Now my ship has some shiny bits. This isn't gonna work too well. I'm actually gonna set it to roughness And I'm gonna add a color ramp over here. What I did here is I Shift D duplicated this and it hit backspace to reset it. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna control this just so that I have some really shiny areas and some really rough areas. And I also don't want this to be perfectly rough. I want it to have some reflection, so I'm just gonna lower it a bit. Let me see how it looks. This might be too extreme. Okay, so you have this area over here, for instance, which kind of looks like it's wet, but that's probably because this is set to black, and this might be becoming too smooth. What I'm actually going to do is I'm not going to use the same texture because that's going to look kind of weird. I'm going to add a Musgraph texture. And using the same combination of the texture coordinates and the mapping node, I'm going to look at it and obviously increase the scale. But the cool thing about the Musgraph texture is if you increase the detail and the lacunarity, if you fool around with the settings just right over here, the Musgraph texture kind of gets like this. That's cool. I can use something like that into the roughness. And let's see how that looks. That is way too extreme. What I might do is I have this, and I only want this detail to be visible on the really bright parts of the image. So I'm just gonna use a mix RGB node, and I'll combine both of them, and I'm gonna set the mode to screen. So if you look at it here, you'll notice that this is more visible in the darker areas. If I flip, what the screen's gonna do is if I have a completely white image on the top and I set it to screen, I can only see the white. If I have a completely black image on the top, I can only see the bottom image. So if I plug it in here, I'm combining the whites of this image with the whites of this image. It is only going to be visible here on the black parts of this image. If I set to multiply, if I have a black image here, only the black's visible. If I have a white image here, only the bottom image is visible. So it turns white into transparency. And this is basically what it's doing. It's changing it around based on this texture. I might just quickly add a bright contrast node over here. And by fooling with the contrast, I can get some interesting results. And because this is roughness, I want it to be mostly rough, so I can invert it. And I'm gonna add a color ramp just to, not have everything here be 100% rough, nor here 100% shiny. I'm just gonna kind of lower the contrast. I could do that with a contrast node. Let's use a contrast node. If I just lower the contrast here, if I lower too much, it inverts, which isn't the point. But if I just ever carefully lower the contrast and get a nicer result, I'm gonna plug that into the roughness and see how it looks. Let me take a look using a preset. Yeah, this shows pretty well what I'm doing. I have some areas here that are shinier, as if they were wetter or dirtier or something. And this is pretty cool. Just using a pre-built HDRI reveals my material a little bit better. Let me look at it in a different light. Just see how it goes. Yeah, let me just use the scene. Yeah, you can see him in some areas. It looks more organic. It looks less repetitive and less perfectly even than if I just had this. If you just compare with this, which is just a blank node, and you compare to this, you'll see that if you look at over here, for example, you get a lot of fine detail that makes the ship look more believable. And what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna use this Musgraph texture over here, and I'm gonna add a bump node. Plug this output into the height and the normal into the normal. And now my ship is really wrinkly. It looks like a passion fruit. So we're going to solve that. I like to change around the distance a bit. It makes it smaller, but it's still very noticeable. And over here, I'm gonna lower the strength until I have just a little bit of this texture and of this feel of these small surface imperfections. It's very subtle. Even this might be too much. I'm gonna lower it a bit, but it gives heck a lot of difference to my image. I might actually crank it up a bit, maybe the distance. I want to tweak it till it's just barely noticeable. There we go. That is pretty cool. This is the material that we're going to use. This is the main ship material. Over here, obviously, I'm gonna do something that I already did in my previous tutorial. I'm gonna select the glass material, select all the faces, and because the problem that I have with it is if I look at it through side view. This black surface here is made out of glass, and the way the Blender calculates that is, so if I have this surface here be glass, everything inside of here is glass because the surface has no thickness to it. So what we're going to do is we're just going to hit select, separate out this part, and I'm going to add a solidify modifier. Just look at it in wireframe mode. This might be too thick. I'm going to make it kind of thin. That's how our ship's looking. You can see some detail, you can see some things. It's pretty nice. For this glass over here, I'm just gonna maybe make it a little bit brighter because then I can see through it. And I'm just gonna make it slightly bluish just because I like it. And this is how we're going to go about the glass material. The second material that I'm gonna work with is this one. I'm gonna set the original one to false color, and I'm gonna use the main ship material over here, and I am going to create a duplicate. So this is the main ship blue. And the way we're gonna go about it is I'm gonna add a mix RGB. I am still going for both the main ship material and the main ship blue material. I am not done tweaking the texture yet. That's gonna be something that we're going to do on the next tutorial, and that's really gonna bring this material to another level. But for now, what I'm going to do is I'm just gonna pluck whatever's coming into the color of the main ship blue material. I'm gonna pluck it into a bottom socket of a mix RGB node, and I'm going to set it to multiply with a factor of 1, and on the top I'm going to choose my color, so this blue right over here. That's nice. So now I have my material over here behaving as blue, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to change it around a bit, maybe over here increase the contrast a bit so I can have some shinier areas, and I'm gonna increase the distance here a little bit more so it can look a bit bumpier. And yeah, that's how I'm gonna go about doing this material right over here. I haven't deleted any material, I've just tweaked 2 materials of the ship. And on the next tutorial, we're going to work on the metal material, and we're going to work on creating some fine detail on the edges so that it looks like the crevices are dirty or something on all of the materials on the ship. Alright, see you guys in my next tutorial.